Thank you. How long are you here with us before you have to leave?
I'm sorry.
How long are you here with us before you have to
I'm
leave?
I'm
You
not
said you have
sure.
to-
I'm not sure. Actually, I'm just not sure. Maybe I want me to leave. It just depends on some other stuff.
Okay,
But let's start.
yes, let's start. Uh, so just a reminder that there is a document for this meeting, so that has the agenda. Feel free to sign in and put any items there. Yes, I'm saving today. Okay, we already started the recording. First up, it's the project descriptor and platform compact item. So this uh, this has recently come up, and it came up in the KPAC working group, um, which is a, a separate CNB platform on what parts of the project descriptor should KPAC as a platform support, and two, how should it keep up with the changes to the spec itself, and uh, what it should do to maintain compatibility with the spec so that it's not drifting apart. I think there were 2 points that I wanted to talk about. One was how much of the project descriptor spec uh, is optional. So like currently the way it's worded, it's either that platforms can implement it if they want to, or just skip out on it entirely. Um, but if you have cases where platforms only want to partially implement it, um, whether that would be feasible, and if they partially implement it, what happens to cases where like you have a platform like Pack, where you have inline Buildpacks or like some Buildpack editions through the project descriptor, and then you try and run the same build on a different platform, and the output image is entirely different because certain Buildpacks were not executed, or like your inline Buildpack didn't work, or for example, certain environment variables which were there in the project descriptor were not set, um, and other things. So um, that's one conversation. The other is um, what happens if a platform, uh, like how can a platform get a reference implementation of parsing the project descriptor and implementing parts of it? Like, how can it ensure that it's setting environment variables in the right order that it's expected? How can it make sure that the include and exclude parts of it are conformant with like other platforms, so that they're not parsing the globs and the patterns differently, um, things like that. So that was the uh, those were the points that I wanted to bring up.
I would say that it is of my opinion that like a very big kind of selling point for the project descriptor is that it's kind of like a portable configuration, right? And I think with that, there's a set expectation. Maybe it's not, explicitly defined, but I would say from an end user's perspective, it is expected that if I have a project descriptor, aka configuration, and build it on, let's say, Pack, and then use that same configuration and build it on something like KPack, right? Like the output should be the same. And like to me, that feels like the holy grail, right? Like that should be what we are striving for. And then we could discuss, okay, like what if, specifically, right? Like, I don't know what the specific features of project descriptor wouldn't be supported in KPAC or are up for debate. But if certain things aren't going to be supported or supportable by certain platforms, I think we should consider what that means, right? Like to that statement. Do you have that information right now to use one as an example?
Yeah, for example, we have builder as a key in the project descriptor, while we don't have the builder spec itself. So certain platform like doesn't have a concept of a builder, rather it has a separate run image and like it's executing the lifecycle in some random container. What happens then?
So specifically for KPAC, could it not? I know that there's the idea of a resource, right? That essentially takes place of the builder, right? So like the builder is defined in Kate resources as opposed to an image somewhere. I don't know a lot of the internals yet, but I probably should get into it. I find it difficult to think that you couldn't create a resource or an equivalent based on the provided input image, right? So I'm not entirely sure what the complexity there is or objection to it, but I don't see why we wouldn't or KPAC couldn't support builder key.
If we want to talk about KPAC specifically, it's the fact that by the time it's reading the project itself or fetching it, it's the builder has already been set. So so you when you specify the resource definition, you specify the URL and the builder beforehand, and it executes it in the builder pod, like the whole git clone and stuff. So by the time it's reading the project descriptor, it's already in the builder, or like it's already executing it in that image. I guess you could potentially re-architect it so that it runs it in a separate container, fetches the builder first, and then runs it in the builder image. But then there are also other nuances. So, for example, in this builder project descriptor extension, we said that if the user explicitly provides a builder flag on pack, that should override the one that's given in the project descriptor. And then in the KPAC world, you can assume that instead of providing a command line flag, you're literally defining that on the resource because there's no command line flag. So is it fair to assume that if the resource at this builder, it's okay to override it with the one that was provided in the project descriptor or not? So there are cases when it comes to precedence orders,
Yeah,
really murky when you think of other platforms and how they may not have a one-to-one mapping with like CLI flags that PAC has, and how precedence is determined between these different options.
yeah, I think the precedence might be a slightly different topic, right? Because I know for BuildKit and the current project descriptor, or I guess the upcoming O2 version, everything was like reverse domain name scoped, right? And so I think for the BuildKit example, I created like an extension area where BuildKit could have its own set of configuration that's specific to BuildKit. And so those are things that, again, more or less provide additional context or information for the build process to occur, but I would still, again, kind of expect the outcome to be the same, whether I run it on BuildKit or PAC, right? I guess, again, it might be tangential at this point, but if the project descriptor fails to provide a configuration that is accepted by, let's say 99% of the platforms, then I don't know how useful it would be at all. right? Like it would only be useful for a very specific
Plat-
use case, right? Like, yeah, platform, right? Like, okay, this is project descriptor, but it only works on pack. So like, if you're going to use kpack, it's not going to work at all, right? Like, then you always have a different configuration for just kpack or something, right? Like, it just gets really messy in my opinion. And then again, those like expectations and the value of project descriptor start breaking apart really, really quickly. I would say that, like, again, going back to like the kpack specific thing, right? Like if you could put in like very specific controls, right? Like maybe allow that from a spec perspective where it says, okay, so like if the key builder, doesn't work exactly like out of the box, right? Like let's say in this case for kpack, the builder image has to match an image resource that you already have inside of the cluster, right? If it doesn't match, then basically it fails automatically, right? And says like you have to add the builder that matches this image or something like that, right? And then that way, at least you could see kind of like the tie there, right? Like how that could actually work and still produces the same output. And I know we're talking very specific case, but I think that's where my mindset is at, right? Like looking at every specific case and saying, okay, what makes the most sense for this particular platform?
So
Uh,
I was saying that if a project has like an inline build pack, so something like kpack, which may not want to support it because of compliance reasons, where like it's just arbitrary shell scripts that's being executed by a user, would the expectation be that if it sees that key, it should just fail
I think so.
for all of the cases? So like all the cases it cannot support, it should just fail.
Yeah, it should fail. And then I guess in that particular case, right, like it does force them to think about like the output is going to be different. Because I think it would be a disservice if it's silently just like works, right? And then all of a sudden you're like comparing images and you're like, what the this isn't what I built on my machine, right? It goes back to this, like it works on my machine, but apparently it doesn't work on kpack or whatever that platform may be.
So I think one other thing that I I don't know if we want to be conscious about in the future additions to project descriptor is whether it applies to pack only or whether it's more widely applicable. Because I think I don't know if we've thought about it in the past when we were merging project descriptor PRs, is like how some other platforms have have the capability of implementing that project descriptor feature or not.
Yep, I totally agree, right? And I think the idea of like extensions to the to the project descriptor is at least a strategy that again came to mind during the build kit thing. But it wasn't ideal, right? But I could definitely see something like that more or less work, because then you are providing more context specific configuration. And so like certain things, yeah, like to your point, if there is a proposal for a very specific feature and it's like pack specific, right? Then we just basically throw it into like a pack specific, like context key or set of configuration.
Yeah, I think we should make that clear that like this is only implemented by pack or something like that. But it's also weird. So let's say a platform refuses to implement the project descriptor spec whatsoever. Should it still recognize that there's a project of TOML and it should fail? Because then it's no longer an optional spec. It's part of the platform spec.
Yeah.
I mean, I think today that's not true. Whether we should change that, I think is, to Javier's point, maybe it should be a required thing in the sense that it's not required to build, but if you put one in there and the platform doesn't support it, maybe you should fail.
But then we should explicitly state that in our platform spec. I think that if the platform detects a project descriptor, and if it doesn't support it, it should fail.
Yeah, I mean, again, like I do want to like make mention that this is strictly my opinion, and I feel like I'm going on I'm erring more on the side of like a strict kind of guidance to try to remedy, again, like that confusion that could be caused to the user. I wonder if there's somebody else on the opposite spectrum, right? Like someone else with a different opinion. And I wonder what their argument would be.
I think Ben is probably on the opposite end of that spectrum from just previous discussions. I think he definitely wants a minimal is not the right word, but like some level of compatibility, right? Where it's like things that aren't required should not be required. And I think like service bindings at one point was one of those. And you know, project descriptor is another one because I think we wanted it where you could build it without using the project descriptor, like it should not be required. But I mean, I think that the thing Sam said of it existing but then it not recognizing it is definitely like a very nuanced case of, I mean, it's not even that it'd be rare, but it's like, should the platform do something, whether that's even to fail or warn or something, right?
Yeah.
And it gets even more murky because project.toml is a very generic file name. You don't even know if that's the project descriptor. Like apart from just detecting the presence of project.toml, it also has to detect the presence of io.buildpack keys to make sure that it has to fail. So that's
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of like, let's say the less strict method, right? And I think at minimum, right, I think it would be good for every platform to at least at the very minimum provide some sort of warning about certain things not being respected, right? Like you don't support Project Toml, you have a Project Toml descriptor file, throw a warning, right? Like that would be the nice thing to do. Like, why didn't these come out the same? At least you could look at the log output. I guess the same thing for other keys, right? Like any key within there. That could be a possible solution. Like the spec, the project descriptor spec would basically say, or could say that any key on there or any feature not supported from the project descriptor must produce a warning or notice.
and I don't even know how that would evolve with the new spec. Like when there's a new project descriptor spec, do platforms that previously supported the old spec, like how are they compatible with the new one? That's another issue. Like because with the platform API, at least we have something concrete that okay, the lifecycle is managing like compatibilities. But the project descriptor spec, you no longer know that what platform API version implements what. Like the platform implementing API version 0.4 can implement project descriptor version 0.1 and not 0.2. And the behavior is different if you parse it in the 0.2 spec. Or there are some new additions which are no longer respected. So that's another issue.
Well, the platform itself could support multiple project descriptor versions, right? So I'm not sure that a platform API version is tied to a project descriptor API version.
So, okay, so we also have to say that the platform should verify the project descriptor version, see which ones it supports, and then fail if it sees a newer version.
Yes, I mean, I think that would be a sensible implementation of supporting project descriptor at all, right?
I mean, that's a similar
Yeah.
pattern how Lifecycle does that with Buildpack API versions, right? Like if it detects a new or Buildpack version, then the one that the Lifecycle can feasibly run, it will basically fail, right? It won't
Yeah.
try to do best case scenario and try to run it, right? And hope nothing breaks.
I mean, I think this ties to the second part of your statement, Sam, about like how do we share functionality essentially so that it's not like re-implemented multiple times. I know that there's a prepare phase idea floating around that Joe is kind of spearheading.
I thought Natalie said they got someone through Google Summer of Code who was going to start that work this summer.
Yes. The only thing I will say is the last time I thought about the prepare phase, there are certain aspects of the project descriptor that make sense at that level, right? Like within the builder, within the context of that execution. But then there's other elements that make sense before or outside of that context, right? Like builder is one of them, right?
I mean, we also discussed that the prepare phase cannot be a part of a single creator binary anymore if it needs to support all of those other things. Like you could technically still have a prepare phase that a platform runs independent,
Separately, yeah.
but then you don't have a single binary anymore that the platform can execute to run all the phases.
Yeah, I think the creator was a really good idea, but it's definitely brought upon more complexity.
It also saves time, right? We've seen that it can create builds more quickly than like spinning up individual containers for each of the phases and paths. So
Right, but I mean that's up to a platform how they want to implement executing the different phases, right? Like there's nothing stopping a platform for basically running all the phases that creator does in the same container.
Yeah, it just has to take into consideration different
privileges.
yeah, privileges, which I think gets a little hairy. Cool. So I feel like we might have derailed there a little bit at the end. So stepping it back, I guess. Like I definitely feel and hear the concern. I think I'm pretty concerned, right? Like what does this mean for the future of project descriptor? Obviously I've voiced my opinion. I wonder what the next steps could be. Is it just like everybody complains every once in a while and then?
I think we need more people to, I guess the next step would be to figure out what other people think, or and then decide what to do with it. Because the other issue I can see with having like a common prepare phase is that, let's say the prepare phase implements the entire project descriptor spec, and a platform only wants to support parts of it and then fail when other parts of it are present in the project descriptor. So now you have a prepare phase which has like feature flags, which the platform has to say, okay, I want to enable these feature flags in like common tooling or whatever, whether it's prepare phase or whether it's some other library or something else. But that also comes into play.
That is interesting, because obviously we have a mentee for doing that work, and it seems like, I guess from my perspective, I don't know what work's already been like decided to be done at this point, right? And if it's like still very undecided, I wonder how productive they can actually be, or how successful they could be for their project.
I mean, I would at least consider this to be one of the requirements. Like if we want all the platforms to share a single binary, whether like that phase should have feature flags to enable and disable potentially unsafe behavior.
To me, I feel like maybe these are two different concerns that we could talk about separately. I don't know if you agree with that. But like, I guess because the next steps would be maybe like document everything that we just discussed right now, right? Like, this is, again, I would throw my opinion on there, right? We could let others throw in their opinions on what makes the most sense for how platforms should support the project descriptor and what should be changed in the spec to kind of enforce it a little bit more, if that's what we decide on.
Should I?
And sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, should I start a discussion with all of the points from today?
I think
Yeah.
so. I think I'm thinking like what's kind of becoming a working model that seems to be somewhat working is like, first we just throw anything on a discussion, right? And like let people just kind of talk. And I want to say like, these are like maybe sometimes even crazy ideas, right? Like just throw them on the discussions. That way we can at least like brew on them. Then from there, if we want to do something, like we could create RFC issues, right? And at that point, at least they're a little bit more solidified. But then the last step would be like the actual RFC, right?
I mean, this is a pretty common pattern in the Rust ecosystem too. Like there's actually oftentimes they like it literally says like pre-RFC thread for an RFC I'm about to create to just kind of hash out the like something that's like not fully baked, right? It's like,
right,
let me hash out this thing, and then kind of the community as a whole, whoever's interested, will then comment on it to try to help kind of get the idea into something a little more fully formed before writing the RFC. So that's usually, it's not like a requirement, but I think it's like basically almost every RFC kind of goes through and does this.
yeah. Yeah, I could definitely see some RFCs that are more, baked, right? Not having to go through this. And I guess that's not what I'm saying. Like the whole reason why I even throw the RFC issue in here is because sometimes like we know it's a good idea, but we don't have like the bandwidth to actually carry it all the way through, right?
Cool.
Yeah, I'm definitely interested, and I should be playing here with the K-Pack stuff a little bit more frequently soon. So I don't know, maybe we could talk about it. Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing, right? Just throw it on Kate's. It's exactly the same thing.
Yeah, I guess going back to kind of the Project TOML discussion or project script discussion, I think one of the things that is somewhat interesting about config file is the point that like, we talk a lot about the builder key, but the builder key is an extension, right? I mean, so is Project TOML, and like, how do you deal with like, I mean, you can imagine easily like other things being added as extensions that may have config, and like, how do you deal with a platform, for instance, that like I think it's very valid for a platform like K-Pack to say, we don't support builders, right? Like it is an extension of the spec, like it is not in the spec, we're choosing not to support it, but we want to choose to support the project descriptor extension, right? And maybe you want to support like extension foo, right? Like something else that comes in because that's pretty great value to you, like that community, right? How do you deal with like, is the expectation like, well, we didn't support this extension, so the build should fail? I mean, I think that's kind of what you're proposing, Javier, because it would work on another platform that did support the extension. But like what is that world where you can kind of mix and match extensions a little bit, and how does that influence what gets put, or like where those keys kind of belong? Is should builder not be inside of the root IO Buildpacks group before release 0.2 and actually like punt it out into like a extension area or something? Like what I guess, what does that look like?
Yeah, I think those are the kind of thoughts I wanted to hear, right? Like that, those are definitely very valid, right? Like the idea that builder is an extension spec and therefore not mandatory, right? Like definitely throw a wrench into my idea that like everybody should support them, right? By
Right, and
definition, that's not true.
And you could make an argument too for other stuff in there that is not an extension that may be question, like a platform may not want to support for security or whatever reasons, but at least they're like part of the spec and not extensions. And so it's like, I think that then becomes, well, I guess if you aren't going to support that, that should definitely probably be a hard fail. Or it's more reasonable to kind of make that expectation, right? It's like, this is supported as part of the thing. And I guess if you aren't going to support it, either aren't compliant with pulling in the project descriptor spec, like I think it's, or extension, like I think you could easily make that kind of hard line much more reasonably if you wanted to do all or nothing. But yeah, I mean, I think the extensions are definitely hairier there.
Yeah, I mean, another maybe good example is the idea of like pre and post build packs, right? Where one of two things, right? Like I need this pre-build pack for my build to even be successful, right? And so then like I put it in Project Tomo and then I like ship it and it works, right? And then I try to run it on KPack and it doesn't support that feature. And so like the build would fail, right? Like automatically. That's kind of not good, right? But I think what's even worse is it's not necessary for it to build, but it adds something to the build process that I would want or expect, right? And so now I've got this application, it builds on pack properly, but then I put it on KPack and it gives me like a completely different image.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's even worse if the build succeeds, right? And
Yeah.
it doesn't launch properly, or it launches but then runs differently. And
Yeah,
it's even
exactly. And
harder.
like you ran your tests on it. I don't know, like, with the test API, I could see things getting really, really weird, unstable, unpredictable is really more the term. And like, once I think things get unpredictable, like, why would anybody want to use it?
I think we should also be more explicit in the project descriptor in a couple of places. Like, for example, the buildpacks key right now, it just says it's a list of buildpacks. It doesn't tell what it should achieve.
Is that not descriptive enough? It's like one of those dictionary definitions where like it links you to another word that means exactly the same, and then it's just like cyclic dependency.
Yeah, it's like, what is mentoring? The act of
Mentoring.
being a mentor. Yeah.
So it says it can be an array of buildpacks. Great, what do I do with it? So this was also a question that came up in the KPack discussion, like what's the expected behavior from this? Do we add this to the end of the current builder, like each of the groups in the builder? Do we only choose this? What happens if these build packs are not present in the builder? Do we have to download them? Do we have to fail? Like that, those are also things that are currently not answered in the spec itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for the build pack list stuff, it is up to the platform whether it wants to download them or not. Because there's definitely platforms that don't want to allow users to download third-party build packs that aren't whitelisted, maybe.
Yeah. See, and then for me, I go back to like, fill it then. Just fill it.
But then, yeah, that like we should not have ambiguity in the spec. Like we should not. We should say explicitly what happens for each of these edge cases, because that, like, at that point, at least in the KPack working group, we were just speculating what would happen or like what we should do.
I mean, I think part of it is like it is up to the platform and how they want to implement dealing with a build pack list. Like a platform could choose like definitely like on Heroku, if we got a build pack list like as a concrete thing, we support third-party build packs from V2. Like the expectation is for most of our customers that you would go off and go and try to download the build pack and then run it. But I imagine, you know, some on-prem other solution that implemented CMVs, like maybe your healthcare company, right? And you very much do not want users to be able to probably be able to list whatever build pack they want. But if there is like a whitelist, I mean, that whitelist is build packs that are in the builder but aren't part of the default detect order or something. You can mix and match and choose how you want to construct your build pipeline from that list, right? And so it's kind of, I think it is maybe too ambiguous now, but it was intentionally left like all platforms do not have to do it this exact way. And this is a way a user can specify that information. I mean, I think that kind of clarification stuff is definitely not an RFC level kind of thing. Like, if you think it would be a good change, you can probably just open a spec PR that tries to clarify it.
Yep.
The other questions that came up were like, what do you do with project.licenses? Is that supposed to go on some label in the image? Because Pack validates it, but it doesn't do anything with it. Like it just validates whether project.license is a valid metadata field structured how the spec says it should be, but then it doesn't do anything with it. So like again, that was also confusing. Like, why validate and fail a build if you're not doing anything with it?
Sorry, what was the association between that statement and licenses?
So
Just the license is key.
yeah, like it checks if project.licenses has a type and a URI, and like Pack has some validation logic where it checks both of those things, but it then doesn't do anything with it. Like it just fails if those things don't exist in project.licenses, or if project.licenses is something else.
Mm-hmm.
So like, what's the expectation from this project.licenses? Should it go somewhere in some report.toml, some metadata field, some label? Like similarly for like the other things in the project table, like what do you do with the ID name, version, or whatever?
I thought there was a statement on here that said that the project set would be added to a label. Apparently not. There's no mention of label anywhere in here.
Yeah, I don't think we do anything with it. I think the validations just ensure you're using proper structure in the file format. I know at some point we're hoping to have schemas. I have schema validation for in a non-open place internally at work for validating a large part of the project descriptor. And so I think the idea is that with those JSON schema things, we can then potentially back out of doing that in Pack and just have a library that Pack could then use to then do validation instead of it having to do it by hand.
But like my question was, why are we validating fields that we don't do anything with?
I think those are two separate concerns, right? Like I think the validation, maybe to Terrence's point, is just making sure that the structure is correct. But I do have a recollection of a conversation about what the importance of these particular elements were. Like, why did we even add licenses, right? And I'm pretty sure they revolved around the idea of this would be very useful information to put in a label for later inspection, right? And so like things like authors and versions and all that stuff would be shoved into a label. That might have gotten lost in the whole process, or maybe decided to be punted on. and then just never came to fruition.
Yeah, I don't remember specifics or that discussion actually, but I feel like most things, if we did decide to do that, someone probably just forgot to do it.
Yeah. I mean, does that sound sensible, and is that something that is kind of expected?
Do you want it on a label, Sam? Is that what you're asking?
I mean, if the information is there, I would want to do something with it, and it would be nice to have a common place to put all of this information in, like the author of the image, or like what's the source URL, documentation URL. I know there are a bunch of OCI labels which are recommended but not required. I wonder if we should map these to them, or
Yeah, I'd be a proponent of that. Because it ultimately seems like there's at this point now 3 options, right? One of them is if they're not being used, why have them? Let's just delete them, right? The other one is put them into a custom label. And then the third one is map them to existing OCI annotations.
I mean, I imagine it's a mix of existing plus other stuff, right? Because I don't think there's existing OCI labels for every single field we have.
Probably true. Yeah, maybe option 2 and 3 are, it's like a mixed breed.
I also wonder if we should be making these as issues on the OCI spec. Like, I think if we are creating a custom version of it, I imagine other people may be trying to do something similar as well. Like, I'm guessing we came to this metadata through some common consensus that this is useful. Maybe it would be nice to have a common set of labels, like that's recommended by the OCI spec. But so that like other tools that use it, um, like other random security scanning or whatever tools end up actually using these labels we're creating.
Is there, I'm looking for a label that doesn't map over. They all do
mean,
as of right now.
Cool. Yeah, I
I
don't
guess
know if we,
ID.
yeah.
Sorry,
ID.
go ahead.
I mean ID, but that I guess is not, it's like the name of the image, right? Is that the ref name?
Um,
And then name is title?
So
would-
the,
the
sorry.
ref, sorry, like currently how I have used the ref name is like literally put in the expected tag, like the original tag the image was created with there. I don't know if that's how it is used, but that's how I have used it.
So if you relocate it, do you have to like change that?
I would assume so, or at least it's the original, like it's the original tag. So like if you're getting the Ubuntu image from somewhere, you know, like this is where it originally came from. And that's how I've used it. I'm not saying that's the ideal way of using this, and I don't think the OCI spec provides any guidance on what happens if you relocate the image. But
Yeah, I mean, there's
Yeah.
definitely limitations that probably don't match our limitations, like all those should conditions under ref name. So I would say maybe that's the exception. For name, there is a title,
Yeah.
image title.
there's a title and a description, which I guess description maps to documentation. Oh
No,
there's
there's a documentation. Yeah.
I mean, another option is if we're serious about this, it could be we can just match the limitations that are imposed by those labels, or have a like when this gets converted over anything, blah blah, right? Like if there is a serious plan to want to do this mapping, like we should probably deal with it, whether that is converting it, like subbing out those characters or whatever it is, like whatever the policies we want to do, or imposing them on the schema.
So I know we're running short on time. It sounded like we had at least an intention of possible actions. I think one of them was I don't know, like we went in a couple places. So the first one was project descriptor and determining whether we want to be more strict about its behavior to support cross-platform operability, right? I'm gonna add a item for that. Okay, let's see. So what else was there? There was the idea of like the mapping of the keys.
To labels, that one, the one we
Yeah.
just talked about.
Yep, that one's easy
Yeah.
because it's fresh in my mind.
Yeah. There's probably, I don't know if it's in that first kind of discussion point, but there was also kind of the point that I teased out about like, what do we want to do about extension compatibility? I mean, I guess it's related, but like how to deal with extension compatibility inside project descriptor when it itself is an extension.
Yeah.
And I guess one of you two, I think, brought up this point about, I think it was Sam actually, what do we do where a project and like an app has a project TOML, but the platform decides is like choosing to explicitly not support the project TOML like extension. At least that like edge case, if it's actually an edge case, but you know, I guess it's an edge case in that we did not think about it very much, that particular case.
I think, and also clarifying any ambiguities in the current project descriptor spec, like what does X do apart from saying what it is, like what is the expected outcome.
All right, and if I heard you correctly, Terrence, it was about if the project descriptor is present, whether the platform should fail or otherwise.
Yeah, like what is the
Like
platform?
what's the
do if it-
behavior, right?
Yeah. But it itself, the platform itself does not support it.
And also, I guess, like, I don't know if you also want to put like different project descriptor version compatibility in there as well, like whether the platform should look into the file, find the API version, and then say that, okay, I'm not compatible.
Cool. I think to me, this all somewhat sounds the same, right? Like overall cross-platform operability. And then there's I think the next one is pretty easy to solve. Sam, do you mind taking that on? I feel like you have some ideas to quickly throw up a spec change. Oh, I can't assign stuff to you again.
I'll do it. And I don't know if you also want to discuss the prepare phase or like common utilities across platforms. Like, do you want to put that under cross-platform operability or just like common tooling to support extensions?
I think it's a real.
I would say it's
separate.
Yeah, there's probably value being separate, especially if we're already kind of working towards something this summer.
And I would also add there, like, what happens when, like, should this common tooling have feature gates, like what we discussed around security and.
Okay, cool. So I feel like this is already being taken care of, right? So I don't know that there's anything we have to do, but I wonder if somebody wants to be involved during that process of that implementation.
I guess Joe and Natalie are mentoring that project, right?
I think they have each separate ones. I forget
I-
who is doing
I
what.
think Natalie's mentoring for prepare phase explicitly. I think Joe's mentoring people for registry.
Oh yeah, the registry stuff. Okay,
Should we tag them to make them aware of this, or
yeah, I'll do that. I have the power to tag Natalie. Sam has some opinions. There you go. So hopefully she'll go and like reach out to you and discuss it further. All right, sorry, go ahead.
no? I guess Matthew may also have some opinions here. Matthew McNeil from who's one of the maintainers of Playtime.
Cool, I'll edit that. All right, and I took the one because it's easy. The mapping project data to annotation. With the exception of ID, I'll probably leave that one out. And let's see, the only other one is the discussion for cross-platform operability. I don't know exactly what the best way this is to get started, but Sam, if you have some bandwidth and don't mind creating that discussion, we could all kind of pile on it, because I feel like we have different opinions on it. Does that sound good?
Yep. I'll create a discussion.
Yeah, might be good being able to pull or ping the various platform people that we know about to give their input.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Makes me wonder if the registry should also register platforms.
Oh, so that we can go bug them so we know where they are. All right, I think you're facilitating, right, Sam? I'll let you do the honors of closing out this meeting.
I don't know what that involves. But yeah,
And
thank
wave and a goodbye. I don't know.
you everyone for joining. Have a good day.
All right,
Uh,
have a good one.